Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Diem,
And I'm Hannah.
and today we've got something kind of spicy to talk to you guys about.
Yes, indeed.
Do you have any experience where you and your significant other do not have the same money mindset?
We all do, I feel like. At least that has been my experience.
So, today we are going to talk to you guys about our own stories and give you 5 tips about how to bridge the gap so that you can be financially successful together.
Yes.
So, to start out, we got to acknowledge that money mindsets are different for everybody.
They really are, DM. And one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is because it can feel like a very hard conversation, one, but also just a topic that we just don't want to talk about all the time because it is difficult to even acknowledge
Yeah.
that sometimes, and not just sometimes, a lot of the times, if you are in a long term relationship, whether you're married and you have a spouse or it's a partner or whatever it looks like, and you share financial decisions, you're not always going to be on the same page.
Yeah. I'm married now, but before, when I was a hot commodity, I was in at least 3 or 4 other long-term relationships. And with those partners, and including my husband today, I've never shared the same money mindset as my partner.
And I think that's normal, right? So first, I think we want to talk about this is a normal occurrence.
Yeah.
It's you're not an anomaly if you and your partner or significant other do not have the exact same money mindset. And I love using this term money mindset because I feel like it makes it a little bit more approachable, right? And it's a really quick way to recognize what is happening. It's a mindset. And I did not make that term up myself. I learned that from a book. And I read multiple books that covered this topic because this was something that was a challenge for my spouse and I when we were talking about investing financially in our future with these huge decisions like buying a house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the first tip we do want to talk about is just that acknowledgement. Just starting there with that simple, I know that I might have a different money mindset than my partner, than my significant other, and neither of them are going to be perfect, right? And neither of them is going to be better than the other. And I think that's something really important to recognize as well. So, DM, how did you deal with that in your relationships? Even that approach of, mine isn't better than yours, and these are our personal experiences.
Well, it's interesting because with the various other long-term relationships, I
Mm-hmm.
had only lived with one partner, and then ultimately I've only been married to my current husband. What that means, though, is that while I was dating, I never really had to join forces with the people that I was in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with because we had separate finances
Mm.
and we never grew our relationship to the level where we had to be kind of on the same path with money.
Yeah.
Even with the one boyfriend that I lived with, we were still very separate, right?
Mm.
And so with my current husband, Jake, and I, we had to figure out how to plan our resources, our hard-earned resources. And I didn't really like that idea at the beginning because I got married a little later in life in my later 30s. And so I've already established spending habits, money values, starting businesses, investing in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was actually a pretty difficult bridge to gap to bridge. And so yeah, we're very different. I'm think about like taking a certain level of risk
Mm-hmm.
for a reward, like investing in businesses, investing in real estate. And I also really have always thought about like generating passive
Mm.
income or having a semi-retired lifestyle where money comes in and it's enough to sustain that. That was always been my goal. My partner is a really relaxed person. He is so chill. And actually, a very attractive quality to me.
Yes.
But also that means he's chill with money too. And it wasn't his drive. His driving force in life was to live in contentment and not be high strung, high stressed. And his perspective about generating income was that you must be stressed in
Mm.
order to achieve that. And he didn't want to work like 60 hours a week.
Wow.
So we found some commonality because I actually don't want to work that much either, and especially for someone else. And so the kind of work I wanted to do was for myself. So I just kind of like found where we could have things in common,
Mm.
even
Mm-hmm.
though our mindset about money was different.
That's great. And I'm sure so many people can relate to that too, where maybe one partner is more like, well, we need to take this risk in order to get this reward. And the other partner is like, but also, I don't want to be stressed all the time, right? I don't
Yeah,
want to have to worry about money and having to work that many hours to maintain the lifestyle.
right.
And I can relate on that too because my spouse and I, we have very different money mindsets as well. I'm more similar to Diem where I'm like, you have to take some risk to get that reward. And my spouse is very traditional in how in the past how he's seen that to happen. So he has a very steady job, works very hard, is willing to work the long hours in order to increase the wealth and salary and the money that you're bringing home, where I'm also more like DM where I'm like, well, maybe there's ways that we don't have to always be doing that. And so for us, his mindset is great for me and my mindset's great for him, and we've been able to meet somewhere in the middle to figure out, okay, well, maybe we slow a timeline down, but then we can still achieve this thing, but we're doing it in a less risky way. Or maybe we have more savings available before making a big leap versus just making that big leap. So there's always going to be differences
Mm-hmm.
that happen. And in my mind, I think a lot of that is developed unless you've educated yourself otherwise. A lot of it's just developed from our personal experience and the experience that we've had with our families and their money mindsets, which is why in traditional, I think, families where if your parents have owned a home or have made investments, you're more likely to be familiar with that form of investment and wealth versus if you don't come from a background like that, it can seem a lot scarier and just like a way bigger decision, way bigger step than it might be for someone else. So, acknowledging that there's the different money mindsets and that neither of them are going to be perfect, neither of them is, this is the one way it has to be.
It's very interesting you say that because, like, Jake came from parents who owned multiple homes, and I came from parents who didn't own their own home, and
That
we
is so
rented and we lived in
interesting.
Section 8 housing.
Mm-hmm.
And our scenario was different in that that's what drove me to want to establish like a different life.
Yes.
And his upbringing, while his parents weren't like wealthy, they were always comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and that lent itself to his desire to just live comfortably.
Comfortably. Mm-hmm.
And it's that actually was the opposite,
Yes.
for us. But I think one of the things that we came to learn is just to appreciate each other's differences,
Mm.
obviously, but
Yes.
also to kind of like embrace those differences, like the way that we have things set up financially. Like we know that Jake's habits, what his financial
Mm-hmm.
habits are, right? Like he's not too into saving for the future. He's not into like planning too far ahead. And that's a skill
Mm-hmm.
set I bring
Mm-hmm.
into the relationship. But so then we work around that. Like
Mm-hmm.
he is happy with his financial discretionary income, and
Mm-hmm.
he spends it till it's gone,
Mm-hmm.
and we designate an earmark for that so that we don't have to um, make such difficult personal changes. We can just change the format in which we manage our money to allow for that. to happen
Yes.
naturally.
And that is such a great point you bring up, DM, because we do the same thing. And it comes from that mindset of embracing each other's differences and money mindsets and figuring out, like you said, what's the format that where both of them can thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, you both need to be happy with the financial decisions that you're making, right? And so DM said it perfectly, where being able to help those mindsets thrive and be there and not try to change them, but finding a way and a format to make it possible and to make it so that you're not having these difficult conversations all the time, right? And it's very helpful to, once you've established, okay, this is your strength, this is my strength, this is kind of how we enjoy to do things, establishing, okay, how can we do that moving forward?
Yeah, and then on the flip side, for me, it's like I really need to know that we're saving money in order to feel good. Like I would be stressed and high strung if every month we spent until the money's gone, or spending at a negative rate, meaning putting money onto credit cards that we couldn't pay off in its entirety. So for me, in order to feel good, I auto save, right? So as money comes in every month, I already earmark some to go to the side. So that's what we do as a team to make me feel comfortable.
Yes.
And again, so then I don't have to force him to say, hey, from your chunk of money, you have to put away savings. It's like, no, we already earmarked what Jake can spend freely until it's gone because that's his habit. And then we already earmark savings because that's what makes me feel comfortable.
Yes.
And then we can be happy.
And the great thing is there's so many ways to do this.
Yeah.
You know, these are just a couple strategies. I do the same thing as DM where it's like automatic savings, like it already happens. But there's lots of ways you can do that, whether it's being like really specific with budgeting, whatever works for you, and bringing your money mindsets together to help those thrive together. You know, there's no one way. And so, acknowledging the different money mindsets, knowing that you probably are going to have a difference, like coming with that expectation, and then being willing to have that conversation.
Yeah. So, in us talking about these 5 tips on how 2 different money mindset partners can come together for a shared vision to build net worth and equity and a legacy over time. If you set that up to acknowledge that difference first, then you can proceed with peace in your mind and in your heart.
Absolutely.
And then that brings us to tip number 2, and that is to cultivate a shared vision. So for me, how I was able to ultimately invest with my husband, who doesn't really have the natural habits that lead to savings or investment or research, is that we were able to, at the very least, cultivate a shared vision. So what does life look like for us 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Yeah.
And we were able to agree actually on a lot of things. We both didn't want to work a lot of hours in a given week. We both wanted to have the freedom to travel a lot. We wanted to live in a nice home, but neither of us wanted mansions or, super like high money things, right? Like
Sure.
boats and cars, maintenance. Like we didn't want those things. And so in sharing that vision together, it will then down the road help us to create a pathway to achieve that.
And it brings you to have something that is shared.
Yeah.
Because knowing that you have different mindsets and differences, having that shared goal is where then you can start to create this plan, right? Which kind of leads us into the next tip, which I'm going to let DM also talk about here from her experience too.
Yeah. So the next one is, creating the pathway to that vision. So for me, in terms of thinking about, okay, top 5 tips about how to get you and your partner to invest together and build a future when you guys don't have the same vision about money, is to have the vision about lifestyle be
So good.
similar. Then the next part with that would be, how do we get there? Because how I sold it to Jake, this idea about what we do is we do house hacking. And I think, coming from someone who, like Jake, is like, what, you want me to do what with our home? You want to split it up and have people live in these 2 units wall to wall with us?
Right, right.
So like, why would someone like him want to make that kind of a sacrifice? Well, it's because we were able to have an end goal in mind, and I presented this as a pathway to get there. So the principle is, okay, we want to have money coming in, but us not working actively for that money all the time. I'm telling you, babe, these rents will be able to eliminate our mortgage. If we have multiple of these homes, those passive incomes can pay for our utilities, our groceries, on our health. So if you want to work and have discretionary income for spending at your leisure, that's your choice. But at least our bare necessities and basics are covered through this strategy. What do you think? What do you think he thinks? He thinks it's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's like, getting that shared vision and then creating a pathway so that it could be a
Yes.
realized reality.
And I mean, Diem's pathway to that and vision have completely materialized, and it does work the way that Diem has set it up to work. And this, her vision is maybe more of an aggressive investment vision. So I'll share a little bit about mine as well.
Yes.
For those of you who maybe aren't as inclined to house hack, which is like myself. So my husband and I, we really do, I mean, we shared a house with one of our best friends who were couples for 2 years. That was kind of our version of house hacking. But
Like roommates.
yes,
Yeah.
like roommates, exactly. We rented a house together so we could both save money to purchase our own homes. But once we were at that point, our value was more around the privacy. So for us, for both of us, that was our shared vision as well of, we want to be homeowners. We want to have this investment long term, and we don't need to have it impacting our lifestyle as much immediately. And we've both, because that's our shared vision, we've both proceeded in that manner. So we have less real estate because we are a little less aggressive in our retirement timeline. But for us, that's the vision that we have together is, we still want to be working our 9-to-5 jobs and investing in ourselves and our future that way as well. But we also want to have real estate as something that can be passive income for us in the future so that hopefully we can retire a little bit earlier, maybe not immediately, but maybe we can retire in our 50s instead of our 60s, 70s, right? So your vision might look different. It could be something that is a little more quickly paced, kind of like what Diem and Jake have done, which is amazing and so inspiring and very doable. People can do this. But it could also be something that's a little more slow paced where you're just like, you know what? I just want to own one home and I don't need it to even, I don't even need to rent it out someday. I just want to own one home. I want it to be my forever home. I want that to be the first home I buy. And if that's your vision together, then you can figure out what that path looks like to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
So, everyone's path to that goal can look different too, but having that shared goal and then creating what that looks like together is so important if you actually want to get there.
So then the question becomes like, why should your partner listen to you? Like, let's say, even if your goal is just to buy one house and go from renting to owning a property. I'm sure you can already think of all the ways that they might say, let's not do that. Our mortgage payment's going to be higher than the rent. Then we have to pay for higher insurance. Our utility bills are going to be more. There's going to be more maintenance. There's going to be a lot of objections. And so one way that you can come prepared is think of those pros and cons, outline them, maybe do research, cite people who have specific successful examples of home ownership after 30 years when you no longer have to pay for a mortgage anymore. What do you think about that, Hannah?
Yeah, well, that for me, it took me about 5 years to prepare all the evidence and knowledge that I needed for myself to even change my money mindset from where it was because of my background. I came from this idea that, owning a home, especially somewhere as expensive as California, would take a lot more time, a lot more money. So it took me about 5 years to re-educate myself on what the possibilities were. And then from there, be able to present that to my husband, Kevin, who also comes from a similar money mindset of where I started, where it's like, it's impossible to own a home. And be able to be like, actually, look at all these different ways that we could possibly do that. And also, as Diem was saying, acknowledging that, there's going to be, maybe we can't do it, right? Acknowledging that, well, maybe you are right. Maybe we can't do it, but we should find out.
Yeah.
Right? So acknowledging that, yes, those things can be barriers. Those things are going to be true. Your mortgage payment will most likely be higher in today's market. You're going to have additional expenses. Your level of responsibility is going to be higher. It is one of the biggest investments that most of us are ever going to make in our lives. For most of us, it is the biggest purchase we'll ever make in our lives. So knowing that if those are concerns and fears, those are very valid, but then having enough research and evidence and believing enough yourself, right, that this might be possible, or what are the things you can even research together to see, or do together to see if it's possible.
Yeah, two things. One, that leads me to think we should do an episode about what are the benefits of either owning a single home, for yourself,
Yeah.
and comparing that to if you owned a few.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think that, we in general say that there's a lot of benefits to that, but what does that really mean long term?
Absolutely.
But anyway, I wanted to share too that Jake and I's experience is different in that when we got married, actually before we bought our first home together, I had already purchased two.
Yes.
And then sold one and used some of that money to reinvest. And so there was already a small bit of proof of concept.
Yes, absolutely.
Already. Like when we met, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and one of it was my office and the other was a bedroom, and I would Airbnb out my bedroom and I would sleep on the couch whenever that was rented. And
true story.
The renters would know. Don't think that I thirst trapped them into thinking they were getting a whole unit by themselves. They knew that. But, that was already the way it was when we met. And at that time, I already owned my house in Ukiah that was rented out for a profit, which covered most of my rent in the apartment. And so I bought another property on my own while we were dating. And then eventually we bought a property together, and then a couple more, and then got married. So some of the proof of concept was still there, but it's very different when you talk about my personal investment versus Jake jumping on board and putting his money on the line too. And so we still had to have those conversations about what would it look like, if we bought this house, and we did a cost benefit analysis on each home before we made that purchase, right? We looked at the market, the rentability, the backup plan. Like if I wanted to rent it out as a short-term rental for higher cash flow, what would it look like if the short-term rental market crashed? And it kind of did a little bit after COVID. After the travel boom happened post-COVID, and then that kind of like died down, what's the backup plan there? So in the this tip number 5 that we have about doing your research, presenting evidence, it's also important to think about worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And if our hopes and dreams didn't materialize, where would we be left, and are we okay with that?
Yes, and even though that is a difficult conversation, it's one that really, in my experience too, Kevin and I had to have those conversations of worst case scenario in order to feel good enough to move forward.
Yeah.
For him especially, even him knowing that I was even thinking about that, right? And knowing that we both knew what the risk is going to be, we both know what the reward could be, but both also being okay with, well, what does this look like if we lose our jobs, we can't pay this mortgage, all of this, are we still going to be okay with that outcome too if we move forward? So doing what Diem is saying, like being so thorough in that research. And if you can do it together, it's even better than, having one person just coming to the table and being like, well, this is everything I've done. If the more you can do together and the more buy-in you can have together, even from those different money mindsets, in my experience, the more successful and more joyful the process can be versus it being really stressful and there be arguments and all these things, because these should be exciting times, right?
Yeah.
When you make a home purchase, it should be exciting, and part of that is having these difficult conversations so that you can both be truly excited in that moment.
I found it very romantic when Jake was like, "Babe, I don't care if we lose everything,
Oh,
as long as we have each other." And then he also says, "But I know that you'll build it back if we lose it all." So like there's, even if that's not the sentiment in what you guys end up with, to have like this trust between each other, knowing
Yeah.
that you're looking out for each other's best interest, honoring each other's worries, and
Yes.
addressing some of the potential setbacks that could occur, will only strengthen your relationship. Even if you don't actually make the move to do it, having
It's
these
so
conversations
true.
bring you closer.
It's so true. And I just echo that completely. And my experience with Kevin and I, it's when we weren't willing to have these conversations that more distance grows
Yeah.
between the two, because you're not willing to even see what the compromise is, right? Or thinking, well, my mindset's better and this
Right.
is the right way,
Right.
versus, and I've been there, believe me, poor Kevin. Um, I've totally been there where I'm like, but look at all this research. This is the way. And no, it is so much better to do it together, to take the time that it takes
Yeah.
to truly be invested in something like this together, which brings us to our last and final tip, which to me I think is the most important, and maybe you agree, we'll have to see, but it is to plan for the conversation to take time. Plan for the conversation to take time. And as I said, it took us 5 years to get to the point where we were both like, okay, let's do it. And that's my story. It could take someone longer, it could take someone shorter, but it takes time to have these conversations. So,
And multiple conversations.
yes, not just one conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so going in with that expectation that you're not going to come to an agreement most of the time or solve anything or come to that compromise or that shared vision after one time having a conversation. A lot of times it can take so much more time than that.
Yeah. So, like previous tips was, kind of like getting you to the place of um, bringing up a point to share with your partner. But there's a difference between like sharing a strategy versus trying to convince. And so,
Yes.
these conversations that you're going to have multiple of, it's you have a shared vision, you see a path to get there, you come with evidence to show your partner, hey, I've done this research, this is what we could do to bring our vision to life. Then you've also got to be open to their response. And that's what takes that back and forth, and having multiple conversations to then also, are they going to be able to point out possible pitfalls that you didn't see, and how can those be addressed?
Yes.
Taking into consideration what they're raising as their concerns or their fears, and trying to mitigate that, eliminate that, or at least have a backup plan for that. And I think that's what's important, is like with me, type A personalities, you want to go in with the plan, they're going to buy into that plan, and then you're going to execute. But that's not really how it always happens, especially when the person on the other side needs more information.
Yes. Yes.
And so what were your conversations like? Like, what were some of the objections?
Yeah, well, I think, the first one at the beginning was just like, we just can't afford it, right? It's just like, no, we can't afford it. We don't have enough money. We can't afford these prices. But that's education too, right? And so for me, I was like, well, maybe, Kev's right. We can't afford it because all the homes here are at least $500,000, right? But until you know what you qualify for, you actually don't know if you can't afford it. And so that 5 years was really getting to that point of like, well, maybe we should at least try to see what we can afford. But those constant, and these are objections that are valid, of we don't have enough money, we couldn't afford to have an increase in living expenses. Again, the responsibility level. Also, something that was very important to my partner, Kevin, my spouse, is comfortability as well. Even though, he does work a job where he works 50, 60, I mean, sometimes 80 hours a week at times, which is not what he wants to do all the time, but he's willing to do that. He also wants to be able to come home and not be worried about money.
Right.
So not having too high of an overhead,
Yeah.
which I completely understand. And at the end of the day, you have a lot more peace of mind if your overhead is not ridiculously crazy versus it being something that you can manage. So that mindset too. So all of those concerns are valid concerns, and were valid concerns. So in order for me to even prove to myself, do a proof of concept for myself, because I was like, no, I know we could do this, I started doing automatic monthly savings to increase our monthly housing expense. So at the beginning of the month,
to kind of mimic that.
Exactly, to mimic what a mortgage payment would look like.
Right.
And so at the beginning of the month, we did this for maybe a year and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, we did a long time. And it was taking a couple $1,000s, so a little bit over what our rent amount was, and saving that automatically. I think it was like 1,500, something like that, 1,500 to 2,000 above our rent that we were paying. And we were paying low rent on purpose so that we could be trying to save more. And it just automatically transferred at the beginning of every month. So then when this concern would come up again, I could point to that and be like, actually, we, as because we decided that together,
Right.
as we've been paying what we'd be paying in a mortgage. The other thing that we ended up doing was paying off literally all debt. So we had no debt when we went into that first home purchase. We did not have to do that. But that put us in a position then where it gave us more confidence that we can make that payment and that something negative would be unlikely to happen. So we worked on together what are the ways that we could even work with these challenges already before we're in the situation that seems like it could be a little riskier. And that's how we went about it. So then when we did get pre-approved and we're like, okay, we actually can afford to buy a home here and a home that we would want, we could look back at that and be like, we can afford it. Even on paper it says we can afford it, but we can also afford it because we've been practicing.
Yeah.
And so that's what we ended up doing.
I think that's brilliant. Just, it's kind of like they say when you first start learning investing in stocks, I don't know what the term is, but like pretend as if you had picked certain ones and then you see how it grows. Our dynamic was different than that. It was actually difficult to... I wanted Jake to be more involved and engaged in the finances. And, he can find that overwhelming. He might want to know as a big picture, how are we doing? But, I was really trying to force it for a while to be like, you need to know all the numbers. Then I was like, now you have to do the bookkeeping so that you'll know the numbers. He was like, I don't want to do that. So
all the fun, just
oh yeah.
Just like, oh my gosh.
He's like, when's our next vacation? And so that's an important thing an important lesson for me to learn. Because my thing is, I never wanted Jake to be in the dark. I wanted him to know where we stood financially all the time. In part because I wanted him to have ownership in our business. But then also the other part is for him to feel the stress when I'm stressed. Like if we haven't collected rents or if we need to cut back on our own spending, or if I need him to increase his contribution and work more because we're running low in these areas and we're not saving the minimum that is needed every month. Then I just wanted his buy-in. What I found, though, over time is that that was honoring what I needed, but not honoring what he needed. And even though I thought, and I still think that it's better for Jake to know more about our finances than he's willing to get involved with, that I just have to honor that that's not his preference, and also to trust myself to know my partner enough that if we cross like a certain barrier where I think, okay, I really need to rope him in at this point, like, to feel secure as a couple, then I'll do that. But not preemptively, not just because I think in general he needs to know. And so that's something that I've learned along the way, that I don't know if other couples run into that dynamic, but I'm actually like, he's like, you do it all. And then I'm like, but no, I need you to know. And he's like, I don't really want to know that much. I just want to know like the basics.
And I do think that is a lot of people's dynamic. I feel like Kevin and we're somewhere along those lines. I do the more financial bookkeeping, but Kev absolutely wants to know the high level things, for sure. And I think that is where, he's even the one who'd be like, well, are you sure we have enough money for this? And I'm like, well, yes, but
let me show you.
Yes. And I think that's where, though, if you're that person in the relationship who is kind of the money manager, it can feel like a lot of pressure. And I think, at least in my mind, I've tried the same things as Diem before, where I'm like, but we should do these monthly budget meetings together and all of this. And that. He's like, oh my gosh, like seriously. It's at the end of the day, though, it's that trust that your partner has in you can feel like a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But I also enjoy tracking our expenses. I also enjoy doing the dreaming of, well, what if we could do this in this amount of time?
Yeah.
And that's not something that Kevin, my partner, enjoys as much.
Yeah.
He is not going to enjoy that process as much when it's the time that we're closer to having it achieved. I think that's when he's like, okay, yes, now, I'm enjoying this part of the process. But I do think if one of you enjoys managing money more than the other, embrace that.
Lean into it.
Embrace it. And yes, maybe it comes with a little bit more pressure, but express that. Express that to your partner. Well, hey, I wanted you to be more involved because it feels like all the pressure's on me. And see if there's a solution for that. Right? And if neither of you enjoy money management,
you're in trouble.
Then maybe it's worth it to get some outside help. Right? So then you don't have to be fighting about it, or having conversations that neither of you feel like you want to have or are enjoying, but you want to be on the same page. So there's just lots of ways to be able to bring your money mindsets together and be able to try to work towards that common goal. And you just have to find the one that works for you. Kevin and I did it differently than Diem and Jake do it. But we're both, working towards achieving these goals that we individually have. And we wouldn't be able to do that unless we had mutual buy-in from our partners, and also feel confident enough ourselves in our mindset to move forward.
Yeah. So to wrap up our podcast today, we want to talk about what has these difficult conversations, what has having them done for you, whether inside your family dynamic, or what it's intended to do too is growing the family net worth or building the family legacy.
Well, for Kevin and myself, it's definitely brought us closer together. And it's definitely, I think, expanded our investment horizons. Because at the beginning, like buying that first home, yes, we both came together on, hopefully this can be a rental at some point. Hopefully this is a good investment. Hopefully we're going to be able to do this, right? Hopefully all these things that people say about home ownership are true. From that experience, we now just recently purchased our second home. And it was so much easier of a process for both of us mentally to come to a decision on that, because we'd seen it work together already. And when we talk about our next home or our next investment, it's like we talk about it in a way that it's possible and that is probably going to happen. That it's not just this, dream or vision that we're thinking, well, maybe someday out there. It's like, no, so we're probably going to be there in this many years. And because of the work we did on that first purchase, talking about this and then really seeing those benefits for ourselves as homeowners, it's made it so that we don't even have to have those conversations as often because we've come so much closer together in our money mindsets. We've come to this place where we're like, I know what you value. You know what I value. So when we come to the conversation, we're already miles ahead of where we were at the beginning.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be in that situation if we didn't take the time to have those conversations before we made that first purchase.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about like mindset around debt and how that differs and what you did to bridge that?
Okay, very good. So, as Diem knows, that's why this is a good question. So, myself, when I look at debt, and this is because of the re-education that I have gone through myself, when I look at debt, I don't see it as necessarily negative. And now being a mortgage advisor and knowing even more than I knew when I purchased my first home, I believe that even more, looking at people's credit profiles and having to be like, hey, you literally can't get this loan unless you have this many credit lines. Like those are guidelines that are put out by the Federal Housing Administration, by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. There are guidelines around showing that you can demonstrate that you can hold debt well. Mm-hmm. So my perspective, I think if you're responsible with debt, it can actually be beneficial to have it. Mm-hmm. My husband's perspective, because of, again, the overhead, the piece around having lower overhead, he's like, I don't want any debt. Even a mortgage debt to him, which, can be very beneficial for your credit and purchasing power and everything. Even that, he's like, I want to pay those down as quickly as possible. So we've found ways where we hold less debt, mm-hmm. where, we usually pay off our cars and we have the same car for years and years and years until we need to buy a new car.
Yeah.
We pay it off and we keep driving that car. We really try to not hold credit card debt because he really does not like credit card debt. And I'm kind of the person who's like, well, if we're not paying interest on it, then let's utilize that. But that's a compromise piece there, right? Where it's like, okay, well, maybe we don't want credit card debt, but we can have a higher mortgage payment, right? So there's ways that you can navigate things even when you're on totally opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's an area that we're totally different, where I'm like, let's leverage the debt to our benefit as long as we are having cash flow and creating more than we're spending.
Yeah.
Where he's like, but the less debt you have, the less overhead you have, the more peaceful you can be. And I completely understand that.
Because there's a rightness in that too, right?
Yes, there
we were
is.
just talking about it earlier where one mindset isn't better than the other.
Exactly.
You just have to find what works for both of you. So for us, and I'll wrap up with this, it's just our experience has been, where I do more of like the driving with our finances. And because we've had such candid and frequent conversations as the foundation of when we started, mm-hmm. our path together, that now, when I make mistakes, which I totally do, like somehow I owed the ADD like $98, but it turned into like $1,000 because I didn't change our address and I got fined. Or we were traveling once and we got like a $1,500 fine because we didn't respond to a short-term rental permit request in time. Things like that, Jake is so forgiving about because he knows that in which ways I am on top of things.
Yeah.
And so, again, even that sentiment brings us closer.
Yes.
That he'll ride with it when we're winning and he's going to ride with it when we're losing. And so, the pressure of being kind of like more of the decision maker or the guide in the financial journey, if you keep the communication open with your partner, they'll ride it with you, hopefully, right? And so to answer that last bit, which is like how that's affected our family dynamic, it's really improved for us. We're closer than ever. I never thought I'd be in business with another person, let alone my spouse. So there's that. And then what it's yielded us is, we, like when we went to get married, we sold one of our investment properties. We were able to take that net income and pay off our wedding in cash. And then we traveled the world, and we went to 17 countries the year after we got married. He didn't work. I just sustained the businesses that we had going. And now we're kind of like at the next chapter where we did that big undertaking. And now it's like, I'm a real estate agent. I'm looking into that career, working more heavily in the YouTube channel. And I'm really excited what the future holds, knowing that we have already had that foundation built from the conversations that were so hard at the beginning, that didn't always go well, that sometimes ended up in yelling for us. And it just all was worth it.
I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah. So with that, we look forward to seeing you again at the next podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We hope our stories resonate with you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.